Hi everyone. This video is going to show you some more HTML and CSS related to layout and positioning, as well as a few new tags that you just haven't seen yet, and just wanted to introduce a few tags to you. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do this layout for just an informational page that I'm just going to take straight from Wikipedia. Great thing about Wikipedia is, if you scroll to the bottom of a Wikipedia page, it is licensed under the Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike license. So that means it is not a copyright infringement if you copy their stuff. It is actually intended to be copied. Technically, if you're using it, you're supposed to give them credit, but if you didn't do that, it would also be plagiarism. So just give credit where credit is due, and you're fine copying from Wikipedia. So here I have my completely ripped off article about bobcats. I also give some credit to Wikipedia, and you can see it's just a few paragraphs as well as a sort of extra bit of information about scientific classification. So what I'm going to show you how to do is set it up so that you have certain elements that are forced into certain parts of the screen. And not only, we've kind of done that before where things are maybe forced to the left or forced to the right, but this time they'll stay there and they won't actually move around. They'll be permanently fixed on the screen, which is something we haven't done yet. And also I'll show you a few different tags that you can use to mark up things with descriptive names. So the first thing I'm going to do is just start adding some HTML to my to my content. So the first new tag I want to show, I don't think I've shown you this yet. There is actually an entire tag that you can use just called header. I think I may have used a header ID before, but there's also a header tag. You'll see both. You'll see people just use a div and put and then put an ID on it that says header, but you can actually just use a header tag itself as well. And this type of tag that's descriptive of what's inside it is called a semantic tag or a semantic element. It just sort of is descriptive of the content, and it doesn't actually really affect directly how it displays, but it is just another way to mark up the content and select it later. And it's a descriptive way to do that instead of just putting everything in a div if that's something that you prefer. So I've got my header, and I will put an H1 for my title, and H2 for my subheading. And then because what I want is to have things split up left and right, I think what I'm going to have to do is have a few different I'm going to have a few different elements to contain everything. So another new element that you can use as a container is a nav. So just like before with the header, you can actually just call the element itself nav rather than using an ID. That's you'll see both strategies used. And I'll just put a few example links. So I added a few links to related reading. And that'll be my nav, and I will have, I'm going to have a sort of main, and then I'm going to have an aside. So that's another, so first of all, if I want to have two sort of content sections, what I can do is I can put my main content in another semantic tag called main. If only I could type. And then I'll put this sort of sidebar. I'm going to put it off to the side of the text. I'm going to call it an aside. That's another semantic tag that you can use for pieces of text that you want to be, or just content in general, that you want to be off to the side of other content. And I think what I'll do, because I want these to be side by side, I'm going to float them inside a container. So I will use a div for that. And I'll say div id equals content. And close that div. And then the rest of the text. Let's see, I'm going to indent everything that's inside of my content div just to make it more readable. And then inside of my main, these will all be paragraphs. And then finally in my aside, I like my scientific classification heading to have emphasis. I want this whole thing to be an unordered list. So these will all be list items. And one last thing I should add a picture. Right now, all I have is text. Also, the text is all just stacked top to bottom. But one other thing I think I'd like to add is a picture. Go back to that Wikipedia article. I'll just try to use the URL. So I'll copy image address. Inside my aside, I'll add image source equals, and I'll just use the URL of that image. That should work fine. Okay, so I think I have everything marked up the way I need it to be. And so now I need to add some CSS. So I'll just try to go from top to bottom. First, my header. Now remember I mentioned I wanted this to actually be fixed on the top, so it'll always be there instead of disappearing when you scroll. First I'll set up a few other things. I'm going to set up my background color. Just do a light blue. Add some padding. And then the way I'm going to get it to stay fixed in one spot is I'm going to say position fixed. And when you use fixed positioning instead of, for example, normal flow where it just goes, where it just goes wherever the default is from top to bottom, or floating where it sort of pushes to one side, you're just going to tell it how, you're just going to tell it where to go and it's going to go there. So I'm just going to say top 0 pixels. So it's just in the actual window. So in the browser window, it's going to be 0 pixels from the top. It's just going to be locked in right at the top. And then I'll say width 100%. So it just takes up the whole screen. So now when I run it, you can see I have this header and it's covering up the text. Now, another issue I'm going to have to deal with is that because it's locked there and it doesn't scroll out of the way, I'm also going to have to reposition my text, as well as my nav, because what I'm going to do for my nav is I'm also going to reposition my nav. So I'll say nav. This one will also be position fixed. This one I'll set a few pixels from the top so it gets out of the way of that header. I'm also going to, and I'm going to set it all the way to the left. So 0 pixels from the left of the window, the left edge of the window. I'll set a fixed width. Give it some padding. Then I might as well set up my div. What did I call that? My div's ID is content. Content div. Its position will be relative. And so what this means is it's going to be relative to where it would have been in normal flow. So we're looking at normal flow. It's clearly like going all the way up to the top, because when something is fixed, it actually ignores all of the, it doesn't interact with all the other elements. So it's not, for example, this H1 is, or the header is not pushing all this text out of the way. So the content div, we need it to be below where it would normally go. So I'm going to say relative to its normal position, 150 pixels from the top. And because the nav is going to be in the way, the nav is fixed to the left, I'm also going to set this 100 and let's try 150. Oops, left 150. So you see that the header is fixed to the top. the nav is fixed to the left side. If I scroll up, however, noticing an issue here. The issue is that the text is actually overlapping with this header, and it looks, I mean, having see-through elements can be kind of cool. However, in this case, I really just want it to be kind of like a solid block, and I believe I'll have the same issue over here. Yeah, so I'm gonna need to do a few things to fix that. So one of the things you'll need to do to fix that is add something called a z index. So this is just, imagine a z-axis. So you have your x and y axis. That's left and right, and top to bottom. Well, imagine if there's a z-axis, that's going to be from the front of your screen towards the back of your screen. And the way it works is we'll just use larger numbers to push it more towards the front of the screen. Smaller numbers are going to go more towards the back of the screen. So if I want the header to be in front and cover up things, I'm going to set its z-index higher than other things. So I'm going to set that to 2. I want the nav to cover things as well. So I'll set its z-index to 2. But then the content div, I'm going to set its z-index to 1. And so the content should end up going behind. And it does. It goes behind the header. And now this is kind of weird. This isn't the problem you think it is. It's not the previous problem. This is not the problem where the text is covering up the nav. Actually, it's just that it actually has no defined background color, so it's see-through. So let's just set a background color. I still want it to be white, but I'm actually going to call it white. And if it's actively white, now it covers things up. Another thing you'll notice is that it stops early. It's really short. So I'm also going to add a height. I'll make it 100%. It'll fill up the 100% of its container. So now it covers up things that overlap with it, all the way down to the bottom. All right, so we have a fixed header on top. We have a fixed side nav, and then there is a content div. This nav also has these links that I would like to style. So I'm going to create styles for anchor tags. Get rid of that text decoration. Let me get this out of the way. Display, instead of inline, which is its default, I'm just going to say display block. So it'll display like a block level element. I'll just set its color. So its color is always the same instead of changing when you click on it. And I think I want to space the links out a little bit. So I'm just going to give each anchor tag a little bit of a margin. So now they're a little bit spaced out. And they're just blue. Okay, so this is almost done. There's just a couple more issues to deal with. One is that I need the content on the inside of, so if you look at when it's expanded, a couple issues. It looks like one, I wanted the content to line up, so I wanted the main content and the aside content. I wanted the aside to actually be on the side. So I'm going to have to write styles for that. and also for the main so that the main gets out of the way. So basically they're both contained inside the content div. So I can just actually float them in their div. So I'll say main, I'll say width 59%. I want it to be 60%, but after like padding and margins and stuff, even if it's a little bit, it needs to be a little bit less than 40 or else it'll take up more than the screen width. And then I'll float it to the left. And my aside, its width, again, I want it to be 60-40, so I'll do a little bit less to make room for padding and stuff. And I'll say width 39, float left. I'll give it a little bit of a border so that there's some kind of separation. Say border left, solid, black line, just 2 pixels wide. And if I run it, so now you can see they're lined up left to right. I think that border is like a little too close to everything. Even for this simple demo, I think it's slightly too ugly. So I'm just gonna quickly, for my aside, I'll add small padding, just a couple pixels. And I'll add some padding to my main, just a couple pixels. Right now there's just a little bit of separation between the content and that border, which is helpful. I need to style my picture because it's kind of like it's in line with this text and I just don't want it to do that, among other things. So let's say image, let's set its width. See how that works. And I'll just use a line break to separate. All right, and for the most part, I think this looks like it does what it should do. I might want to add a little bit of padding to the text because the text is kind of up against the edges too. The paragraph tag. Give it a little bit of padding. So I'll set its font size. Okay. I think the font size is better, and that padding helps clear the text away from other elements. So now let me just resize. If I resize my window, just make sure everything looks okay. And so you'll see what's happening is the content, the two content columns, the main and the aside, are floating inside that container, but the header and the nav are fixed and they just stay right where they are. They don't move. So there's just a couple different techniques that you can use. I'll be honest, like getting things to work around fixed and relative positioning is kind of difficult. Like I made it look pretty easy just now, but you saw what I was doing from notes after a lot of sort of fussing around with it. Sometimes you have to, if you want this effect, if you want something that's fixed in position and everything else moves, but it doesn't move as things move around it. I mean, you will have to deal with that. But when you do that, it kind of breaks the normal flow of how things show up on screen, and there is a bit of just fussing around with it to get it to work. So just kind of keep that in mind whenever you're looking to do this. It is usually easier to use to just put things into containers and then let things use normal flow or float or set widths within those containers. But this is a technique that's available to you if you need it.